It is June 6th, 1944, just past midnight, a headquarters bunker somewhere near Calais, France. A German staff officer, 44 years old, studies a map covered in pins marking enemy divisions. According to every report on his desk, the largest Allied invasion force in history is still sitting in England, aimed directly at his section of coastline. He believes the landings happening in Normandy right now, in this exact hour, are a diversion. A trick meant to pull his forces away from the real attack still coming here, at Calais. He is wrong. He will keep believing this for weeks. So will his superiors in Berlin, all the way up to Hitler himself. An entire American army group is supposedly forming across the Channel, commanded by the most feared tank general in Europe. It has divisions, radio traffic, supply convoys, training camps stretched along the coast of Kent and Sussex. Not one soldier in that army exists. Not one tank is real steel. This is the story of a lie so complete that it held back tens of thousands of German troops from the one battle that actually mattered, for weeks after it had already started. To understand how a lie this size could work, we need to go back 5 months, to January 1944, inside a small planning office in London. British and American intelligence officers already knew something valuable about their enemy. Hitler expected the invasion to land at the narrowest point of the English Channel, the Pas-de-Calais, the shortest possible crossing from England to France. Most military planners would have tried to hide that assumption. This group did something almost backwards. They decided to feed it. If Hitler wanted to believe the real invasion was coming at Calais, they would build him an entire army to prove it, one detail at a time, using nothing but rubber, plywood, and radio static. They called this Operation Fortitude, and its centerpiece was a fictional force named the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG for short. On paper, back in England, this army group was massing for a strike on Calais, while the landings in Normandy would be dismissed as nothing more than the opening move. To make this fictional army believable, they needed a face the Germans respected and feared. They chose General George Patton, the one American commander German intelligence rated as the Allies' most dangerous tank leader, the man they expected to lead any serious attack, not a distraction. Patton had no real army group to command that spring. He simply stood in England, visited the empty camps, let himself be photographed near the fake equipment, and waited. Behind him, an entire deception machine was already running. Inflatable tanks made of rubber tubing stretched over wooden frames, dummy landing craft welded together from scaffolding pipes and empty oil drums, plywood aircraft parked out in the open on real airfields, positioned exactly where German reconnaissance planes would photograph them from high above. None of it needed to survive close inspection. It only needed to look real from 4,000 feet up, through a camera lens in gray morning light. And it worked exactly as well as it needed to. To understand who actually built this illusion and made it move across the English countryside week after week, fooling an entire intelligence service that prided itself on precision, we need to look at a strange military unit made almost entirely of artists, sound engineers, and set designers. It is January 20th, 1944, an army camp somewhere in England, and around 1,100 men are being pulled together into a unit with no real weapons and no real purpose in the way any soldier understood the word purpose. They call it the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Almost nobody outside this camp knows it will later be remembered as the Ghost Army. Most of these men were painters, sound engineers, radio operators, and set designers before the war. Now they are being asked to build an army that will never fire a single shot in anger, and somehow make it look completely real from 4,000 feet in the air. Their first tool was rubber. Inflatable tanks, built from tubing stretched over wooden frames, could be pumped full of air by a small crew in under 20 minutes and folded back into a truck just as fast. From a distance and from above, through a German reconnaissance camera, a field full of these dummy tanks looked exactly like a real armored division sitting and waiting to move. Alongside the tanks came dummy trucks, dummy artillery pieces, and plywood aircraft parked out in the open on real airstrips, positioned precisely where enemy photography would find them. But rubber and plywood could only fool a camera. To fool an ear, they needed something else entirely. And this is where the Ghost Army built something almost nobody expected from a deception unit. A separate signal company loaded half-track vehicles with speakers powerful enough to throw recorded sound 15 miles across open countryside. Engineers had spent months recording real armored divisions on the move. The grinding of tank treads, truck engines idling, men shouting orders, metal clanking against metal, then mixed those recordings into loops that could run for hours without repeating in any obvious pattern. At night, these half-tracks would roll quietly into position near the coast, hidden just behind a hedge or a tree line, and switch on their speakers. A German listening post miles away would hear what sounded unmistakably like an entire division setting up camp. Engines running, men working through the dark. There was no division there. There was one truck and a stack of speakers playing pre-recorded sound into the empty air. Radio traffic filled in what sound and rubber couldn't finish alone. Signal units flooded the airwaves with the exact volume and pattern of message traffic a real army group would generate. Fake unit call signs, fake supply requisitions, fake orders about troop movements that never happened, deliberately transmitted in ways German radio intelligence in France was almost guaranteed to intercept. Every fake message logged by a German listening station became one more brick in a wall of evidence supporting an army that existed only on paper and in the air. None of this alone would have been enough. The final piece came from inside German intelligence itself, through agents Berlin believed were loyal spies working inside Britain. Several of these agents had actually been turned, secretly working for British intelligence the entire time, feeding their German handlers detailed, convincing, entirely fabricated reports confirming everything the rubber tanks and the radio traffic were already suggesting. Berlin's own spy network became the delivery system for its own deception, handing German commanders exactly the confirmation they were primed to believe. By late spring, this combination of inflatable steel, recorded engines, invented radio orders, and false human intelligence had built something no single lie could have created alone: total conviction. German commanders across the Channel were not being tricked by one clever illusion. They were being surrounded by dozens of independent sources that all happened to agree with each other, because all of them were being run by the same small group of planners in London. To understand exactly what German command believed on the morning the real invasion began, and why they kept believing it for weeks after Allied boots were already standing on French soil, we need to go back to the desk of the man reading these reports in Berlin himself. It is the early hours of June 6, 1944, and news of paratroopers landing over the Cotentin Peninsula reaches German command posts around 3 in the morning. Nobody wakes Hitler. His staff knows he went to bed late, and no officer in that chain wants to be the one who disturbs him over reports that still sound unclear and fragmented. He will not be briefed until almost noon, roughly 9 hours after the first Allied soldier touched French soil. By the time Hitler is finally told what's happening, Allied troops are already fighting their way off 5 beaches in Normandy. And even now, staring at real landing reports from real divisions, his conclusion doesn't change. He still believes this is the diversion. The real invasion, the one aimed at Calais, is still coming. This single decision is the entire deception paying off in real time. 10 panzer divisions were sitting in France that morning. But here's the catch nobody outside the German High Command fully understood. 4 of the strongest, including elite units like the 12th SS Panzer Division, were held in a central reserve that could not move without personal authorization from Hitler himself. Not from Rommel commanding the coast, not from Rundstedt commanding the entire Western Theater, from Hitler alone. Rommel had wanted these divisions positioned directly on the beaches, ready to counterattack within hours of any landing. Rundstedt disagreed, preferring to hold them centrally and strike wherever the real threat emerged. Hitler split the difference in the worst possible way, giving a few divisions to Rommel's coastal command and locking the rest in a reserve that needed his personal sign-off to move at all. On the morning that mattered most, that sign-off simply did not come in time. 15 German infantry divisions sat around the Pas-de-Calais that day, roughly double the force positioned near the actual Normandy beaches. This wasn't paranoia without cause. German intelligence genuinely believed, based on months of fabricated radio traffic, inflatable tanks, and false agent reports, that a second and larger invasion force under Patton was still forming across the Channel, aimed directly at Calais. Field Marshal von Rundstedt's own after-action report, written just weeks later, admitted plainly that Allied deception had actually worked exactly as intended. German command had genuinely expected the airborne landings, but the overall shape and location of the true main effort caught them completely wrong. They knew something was coming, they simply believed it was coming somewhere else, in greater force, later. For weeks after June 6th, this belief didn't fade, it hardened. Every additional piece of fabricated radio traffic, every fresh false report from double agents Berlin still trusted completely, reinforced the same conclusion. Hold the line at Calais, wait for the real blow. Some panzer divisions from that central reserve did eventually crawl toward Normandy, but slowly, days late, arriving in a battle that had already tipped against them. Historians studying this decision decades later reached an uncomfortable conclusion for German pride. This wasn't a story about brave but outmatched soldiers losing to superior firepower alone. It was a story about an entire high command, and one particular man at the very top of it, refusing to update a belief even as the evidence in front of him kept getting louder and clearer by the hour. To understand exactly when German intelligence in Calais finally accepted there would be no second invasion, and how catastrophically late that realization actually was compared to when the truth had already become obvious to almost everyone else on the battlefield, we need to trace the paperwork trail all the way through that summer. It is June 9th, 1944, 3 days after the landings, and inside a small London office, a Spanish businessman, known to the Germans only by his code name, sends the most important radio message of his entire secret career. His German handlers believe he is one of their most reliable agents anywhere in Britain. In reality, he has been working for British intelligence from the very beginning, and every single report he has ever sent has been carefully written by a small team of officers, deciding exactly what Berlin needs to believe next. His message that day is long, detailed, and urgent, marked for immediate forwarding to the German High Command. It states plainly that Patton's army group has not moved from southeast England, and that the landings underway in Normandy are nothing more than a diversion designed to draw German strength away from the real invasion still coming at the Pas-de-Calais. Berlin accepts this report completely, not with hesitation, not with a request for confirmation, but as decisive proof of something they already suspected. This single message becomes one of the most consequential pieces of fiction in the entire war, because German command doesn't just believe it for a day or a week, they hold on to it for months. Through July and into August 1944, while American and British soldiers are fighting yard by yard through the hedgerows of Normandy, German records show 2 armored divisions and 19 infantry divisions still sitting at the Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that will never come. Some of Germany's strongest available reserves in Western Europe are frozen in place, guarding an empty stretch of coastline, because a fictional army group supposedly still threatens to land there any day. The cost of this delay becomes brutally clear once you look at when German reinforcements actually did move. The 12th SS Panzer Division didn't reach the Normandy front until June 7th, a full day after the landings began. The Panzerlehr Division, one of Germany's most capable armored formations, didn't arrive until June 9th. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, took even longer, delayed further by Allied air attacks and sabotage from French resistance fighters along its route north. Every single day these divisions spent late, or simply absent, because they were still guarding Calais, was a day the Allied beachhead had to dig in deeper, bring in more men, stockpile more supplies, and build the kind of overwhelming strength that would make a late German counterattack meaningless, even when it finally arrived. By late July, the front around the town of Saint-Lô had ground into a bloody stalemate, 7 weeks of attrition wearing down both sides. On July 25th, American forces launched Operation Cobra, a massive breakout attempt built around heavy bomber support, hitting a narrow strip of German defenses. The attack stumbled badly on its first day, advancing barely 2.5 miles. Then something happened that should never happen to a properly reinforced defensive line. On the following day, American troops discovered the Germans simply hadn't moved reinforcements into the gap overnight. Divisions that should have been rushing toward this breach were still elsewhere, some still tied down near Calais by a threat that had stopped being real the moment the first landing craft hit the Normandy beaches 7 weeks earlier. American forces pushed 5 more miles almost unopposed. Within days, the German line in Normandy didn't just bend, it broke completely, and the road toward Avranches and the wider liberation of France opened up. Historians studying German unit movements after the war reached a conclusion that still unsettles military planners today. The deception hadn't just worked on June 6th. It had kept working for nearly 2 months afterward, quietly bleeding away exactly the kind of reinforcements that might have turned Operation Cobra into a bloody failure instead of the breakout that finally shattered German defenses in France. To understand exactly when this fiction finally collapsed inside German intelligence, and just how long it took the truth to travel from the battlefield back to the desks of the men who could have acted on it sooner, We need to look at what German commanders in Calais were still writing in their own reports, weeks after Cobra had already begun tearing their entire front line apart. By August 1944, the lie was finally cracking apart, but from the wrong direction entirely. German radio security warned Berlin that their most trusted agent inside Britain might be compromised. Not fake, compromised. Nobody suspected he had been working for British intelligence from day one. Fearing exposure, that agent went silent and vanished underground, and only then did German commanders start quietly questioning reports they had trusted completely for 8 straight months. By then it no longer mattered. The reinforcements that should have crushed the Normandy beachhead in June had spent the entire summer guarding an empty coastline instead, and Operation Cobra had already broken the German line beyond repair. The most staggering detail comes from a single memo British codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted after D-Day had already begun. It proved Berlin still believed a second, larger invasion was coming. The popular version says inflatable tanks fooled Hitler. That is true, but it is not enough. Rubber tanks could fool a camera. Fake radio traffic could fool an operator. A false report could fool a desk officer. But fortitude worked, because every false signal matched what German command already expected. The shortest route across the Channel pointed to Calais. Patton was the commander they feared most, and Normandy looked too far west to be the main blow. That is the real lesson. The Allies did not force Germany to believe something impossible. They built evidence around a belief Germany already wanted to hold. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops gave the deception a physical shape. Its soldiers used decoys, sound equipment, and staged signals to make small forces look much larger. But the decisive deception was strategic, coordinated through double agents, and controlled radio traffic. 15th Army remained in the Calais area through the crucial first weeks after D-Day, while Allied forces gained time to secure and expand the Normandy bridgehead. So the army that never existed did not win Normandy alone. Weather, naval power, air power, logistics, and the men fighting on the beaches mattered more. But the Phantom Army helped deny Germany the moment it needed most, the chance to send every available reserve against the landings before the bridgehead became too strong to destroy. An army of rubber did not defeat Germany. It made Germany wait for a battle that was never coming. There is one final irony. General Patton, whose name made the fictional army believable, never led the invasion of Calais because no invasion of Calais was ever planned. His most important contribution that spring was not an attack. It was being seen in the right places and absent from the beaches where German command expected to find him. The deception was so convincing that the Germans did not need a final order saying, "The army is fake." Reality itself became the answer. By the time Allied troops broke out of Normandy and rushed across France, the supposed invasion force in southeast England no longer had a purpose to hide. Operation Fortitude remains a clear example of how intelligence failures happen. The German system collected real photographs, real intercepted radio traffic, and real messages from agents it trusted. The problem was that the evidence had been designed to point in one direction from the start. Its analysts did not lack information. They had too much information, built around a false conclusion. For the soldiers waiting in the Pas-de-Calais, the result was simple. They trained, guarded bunkers, watched the gray water of the Channel, and waited for landing craft that never appeared. Meanwhile, the real battle had already moved far beyond Normandy. Before Fortitude, Juan Pujol Garcia had already built a spy network from nothing. The Germans knew him as Agent Garbo. They believed he had agents across Britain. Dock workers, clerks, railway employees, officers, and people inside military camps. Most of them never existed. Pujol invented identities, personalities, salaries, travel problems, and even reasons why some reports arrived late. Berlin paid for information gathered by a network that was largely fiction. That made him unusually valuable. A false report from one source can be doubted. A report that appears to come from several independent people feels stronger. Garbo understood this. He did not simply tell German intelligence that the invasion would hit Calais. He built a web of imaginary witnesses who appeared to reach that conclusion separately. British intelligence then controlled what his handlers received. His reports included enough small, true details to protect credibility, while the major conclusion remained false. That balance is the educational core of successful deception. A convincing lie is rarely made of invented facts alone. It uses verifiable details to guide the listener toward the wrong interpretation. Garbo was not the only double agent, but his reports became central to Fortitude because German command trusted him at the highest level. On June 5, 1944, Garbo sent Berlin a warning that Allied forces were preparing to land. It was real enough to protect his credibility, but it arrived too late to change anything. British handlers had delayed its delivery until the invasion was already underway. Then, after the Normandy landings began, came the message that mattered most. Garbo reported that the force in Normandy was a diversion, and that Patton's 1st United States Army Group remained in England, ready to strike the Pas-de-Calais. German command treated this as confirmation, not speculation. It fit the maps, the aerial photographs, the radio traffic, and the wider belief that the narrowest crossing of the channel had to be the main target. That is why the message worked. It did not ask decision-makers to abandon their assumptions. It rewarded them for keeping them. The result was strategic delay. The German 15th Army stayed positioned around the Pas-de-Calais during the decisive early period after D-Day, while Allied troops reinforced their positions in Normandy. The deception did not need to make every German officer believe every detail. It only had to create enough doubt at the highest level to slow the movement of reserves. In war, a delay of days can matter. A delay of weeks can decide an entire campaign. By the second week of June, the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Allied troops had secured beaches, brought in artillery, built supply dumps, and expanded their bridgehead across Normandy. This did not look like a short raid. It looked like an army preparing to stay. Yet German commanders still searched for proof that the larger attack would come at Calais. They read every Allied movement through that expectation. When reinforcements went to Normandy, they saw preparation for a diversion. When Patton remained in England, they saw confirmation that his army group still mattered. When no second landing appeared, they concluded the Allies were waiting for better weather. This is confirmation bias in its most dangerous form. New evidence did not change the belief. It was reshaped to protect the belief. The fortitude planners understood this before the invasion began. Their task was not to prove that Normandy was unimportant. That would have been impossible after June 6th. Their task was to keep Calais important enough that German reserves could not leave. And for the first crucial weeks, it worked. The German 15th Army remained in the Calais sector while the Normandy bridgehead became stronger every day. The decisive weakness was not lack of German information. It was the failure to ask one hard question. What if the evidence we are receiving was designed to make us think exactly this? By late July, the deception had achieved its purpose. Operation Cobra broke the German line near Saint-Lô on July 25th, and Allied forces moved out of Normandy faster than German command could rebuild a defense. The fictional invasion at Calais no longer needed to exist. The real Allied armies were already racing across France. But fortitude did not end with a single announcement or a German order admitting failure. It faded as reality became too large to deny. Every mile Allied troops advanced made it harder to claim Normandy was only a diversion. Every German unit trapped in the west made the empty coast at Calais less useful. The fake camps were removed. Inflatable tanks were packed into trucks. Radio traffic was reduced. Patton was sent to command a real army in France. The physical props disappeared quickly. Their effect remained. The German 15th Army had spent the decisive early weeks waiting for a force that never crossed the Channel. By the time units were redirected, the Normandy bridgehead had become a continuous front supplied through ports, beaches, and thousands of vehicles. The chance to defeat the invasion at its weakest point was gone. That is the final value of deception. It does not need to win a battle by itself. It only needs to steal time from the enemy. At the moment, time matters most. The legend says rubber tanks fooled Germany. That is true, but it is not the full story. A rubber tank can fool a camera for a few minutes. A fake radio message can fool an operator for a few seconds. One false report can fool a staff officer for one afternoon. Operation Fortitude fooled German command for weeks because every false signal supported what Germany already believed. Calais was the shortest crossing. Patton was the commander to fear, and Normandy looked too far away to be the main target. The Allies did not create a fantasy from nothing. They built a false conclusion out of believable details. They used inflatable vehicles, staged camps, controlled radio traffic, and double agents like Garbo. Each element supported the others. A photograph showed tanks. A radio intercept suggested those tanks belonged to a real unit. An agent report explained why that unit was gathering near the coast. German analysts saw separate sources confirming the same conclusion. In reality, the sources were connected by one deception plan. That is the real lesson of fortitude. Intelligence fails not only when information is missing, it also fails when leaders receive information that perfectly matches what they already expect to see. The 15th Army waited near Calais during the weeks when Normandy was most vulnerable. That lost time could not be recovered later, no matter how many real German divisions finally moved south. The army that never existed did not win the war alone. The men on the beaches, the ships in the channel, Allied factories, pilots, engineers, and logistics did that work. But the Phantom Army gave them something no weapon could provide: time. And in June 1944, time was enough.